Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for all joining. I will give it a couple of minutes, but as people join us today, we have a full house. It's going to be a very exciting session. So once again, good afternoon to our panelists, our wonderful panelists. We have a guest speaker today, and we welcome all you attendees from Ontario, I think across Ontario, and sometimes we've had people from out of town as well, from across the world. So hopefully we can accommodate the whole world at some point. But so today's show, no further ado, is about housing and tenants' rights. Our settlement team, who've been working in that domain for a while, usually has a lot of questions, a lot of clients who are facing issues, from eviction notices to challenges in trying to find the proper accommodation that is proper, that is neat, that can also be financially stable and secure for them. So anyway, we've decided to put on this show to answer those questions. We know there's a lot of you out there that are facing issues. Some are from organizations that today probably have questions that would help their clients. Let me introduce Romina and Bisan. Both Romina and Bisan have been with MNLCT for a few years. They are from our settlement team. Both are professional specialists on the topic. And we welcome you today. And they both can support in different languages. Romina speaks Spanish and Bisan speaks Arabic. So if you have any questions in any of those languages, feel free to ask your questions, raise your hand, or you can also have it in the chat room. And I also want to introduce Mr. Joe Myers. Joe is from Willowdale Community Legal Services. He's director and a lawyer. He's well known in the circles in the legal circles, I say, and he's been dealing with this issue for a while. So Willowdale, in case you're not aware, Willowdale Community Legal Services is a community legal clinic that's funded through legal aid, whom we work a lot with as an association. So Joe, welcome to our Ask MNLCT session. It's good to have you here today. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you. Thank you, Miles.
It's great. Romina, I just want to quickly introduce yourself in Spanish, just so our Spanish speakers can know that we have a Spanish speaker.
Bueno, bienvenidos a Ask MNLCT, otra sesión que tenemos informativa. Mi nombre es Romina, como recién decía Miles, trabajo en la organización hace ya 4 años y servimos a la comunidad hispana, así que si tienen preguntas en español, están bienvenidos a preguntar. Gracias.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. And Bisan, welcome.
اسمي بيسان سوري اسمي بيسان بشتغل بمؤسسة MNLCT لل3 سنين اللي مرقوا ببرنامج الاستقرار للاجئين الجدد. نحن عم نشارك بهذا الاسك MNLCT ويبينارز لحتى نكون جاهزين لأي أسئلة عندكم. وبرنامجنا اليوم وموضوع اليوم هو خاص بموضوع البيت والاستقرار بالبيوت. وإذا عندكم أي مشاكل أو أي شيء عم تواجهوه نحن جاهزين لحتى نساعدكم ونجاوب على أسئلتكم.
Thank you, Bisan. Shukran, Jazilan. So on your screen, everyone, if you're just joining in, so feel free to ask questions at any time, any point in time. You can do that through the chat room, or you can raise your hand and I will unmute. And you can ask that question to any of our panelists, or you can even type your Q&As in the Q&A chat room as well. So those you can see at the bottom of your screen. And then again, Arabic or Spanish, we can answer those questions as well if you're a Spanish or Arabic speaker. Thank you very much again once more. So this topic is quite interesting for us all. I know some of the questions that we get, and I want to start with you, Romina, we get from clients, because you and I were talking the other day, is that we have a lot of people that show up at our doorsteps for the first time. They've just newly moved into the country. They don't know where to go, what to do, and what sort of, what options they have. Can you start off with that? So what sort of services that we can help them with, and how would you advise someone that's starting off from scratch?
Well, like we all know, the housing crisis going on in Toronto is big, and it's been like getting worse this past years. Many people arriving to the country, the first barrier they encounter is the language barrier, first of all. The other struggle is the financial struggle, many times because they are recipient of, like in the case of refugee claimants who are receiving Ontario Works, sometimes they are not as accepted in their applications. They need to apply for a place to live, and in many cases their applications are rejected because they don't have proof of income as a job, for example, and they are recipients of Ontario Works, and many times landlords are rejecting those applications. And another one that I encounter in my years working at MNLCT, many people coming from Syria, they have many children, and their applications got rejected based on the number of children, which it amazed me, and I couldn't believe that landlords here can actually reject an application based on family, which is like some sort of discrimination. But Joe can explain further for sure in this sense, because it's like that gets into the legal matters. So we offer the support, we give broad information about like ways of like applying for places, and then we also provide the clients with sources where they can find places so they can apply to live. But in the legal side of things, when their applications get rejected, or when they are feeling they are being discriminated, or the landlord is like abusing some sort, like in some ways, then it's when we start like referring to specific services, like the legal clinics in this case. Actually,
yeah, that's quite interesting to note. How serious is it? Like, have you seen? I mean, before I turn the mic to Joe, because Bisan, you worked a lot with that, with Syrians and the Syrian community. What sort of have you seen an increase in that type of those type of rejections that we're getting?
Yes, actually, like Romina said, it's happening with a lot of families. Like when they come newly to Canada, the major problem that they face is the financial problem. Most of them, they come and they receive social assistance. Actually, we came to probably like a solution to that. We were talking directly to the caseworkers, and they agreed for some families to pay directly the rent that goes directly to the landlord. In this case, some applications were accepted this way. But for big families, like Romina mentioned, this is a big problem. Most of them, they have big families, and landlords, they're very strict about the number of people that they're going to live into the apartment. Like for an apartment of 3 bedrooms, like families with 7 people, it's very hard to accommodate this family into an apartment of 3 bedrooms. So in this matter, like we really get stuck. Sometimes we don't know what to do because it's a rule, and that we can't change. We can't find a solution for other than just offering another area or a house, probably, which is going to be more expensive for them.
Actually, I want to bring that topic and talk about, you know, the sort of alternatives that you may find for them. But before that, Joe, I mean, have you been getting cases like this where people are getting rejected just like that, simply getting rejected? What do you do?
We do hear about it, and there's no dispute that there's discrimination in housing, and especially with new immigrants finding housing. It does happen. It's obviously contrary to the law of Ontario, the Ontario Human Rights Code, you know, speaks to discrimination and discriminatory practices, and landlords are not allowed to discriminate based on the composition of one's family or family size. On a practical level, it's a really difficult problem to fix, because a prospective tenant can make an application to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, but it takes months, if not years, for that application to be processed. And in the meantime, the family's looking for housing. So although the practice is clearly discriminatory and contrary to the law, it's a difficult problem to address. The City of Toronto does have occupancy bylaws that speaks to the number of people within certain space and what's allowed, but it's very rare that there would be so many family members within, say, a 3-bedroom apartment, even 6 or 7 family members in the standard apartment in a Toronto high-rise. A 3-bedroom apartment would not offend the bylaw for overcrowding or anything like that. So it is a problem. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate on this basis, but practically addressing the problem can be very difficult because it takes so long for the tribunal system to work.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does take long for sure. I mean, we know how you know, the courts sometimes not just any matter, but the other side of it is that, let's say someone does pursue that process. I don't know what the percentage is, and you finally get to court, and you know, what is it? You've got that option. I mean, how easy is it to prove that your potential landlord was being, you know, whatever, discriminatory, you know, this was an act of discrimination, let's say, or human right abuse, because he's just simply turning down you know, he could say, well, I found another tenant before I looked at this application. It could be simple, you know, a simple reasoning as that, right? So even though you may go through that process, and I doubt many people do, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the incidents of discrimination far outnumber the applications filed with the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. But Miles, you raise a good point, and it applies to all legal cases, not just the type that we're talking about now, and that is that successful applications are decided on evidence, and you need evidence to present to the tribunal of a landlord's discrimination. Sometimes landlords are outrageously forthright in their discrimination, and the evidence is not difficult to obtain. Other times it's a bit more tacit and a little harder to obtain. So whether the case succeeds or not, a lot of time depends on evidence. Just to mention one other point, the bigger problem and issue that we see with new immigrants arriving in Canada looking for housing is the issue of rent deposits. So under the law, a legal rent deposit is the equivalent of 1 month's rent. But we see all the time, we see new immigrants asked to pay far more than 1 month's rent, sometimes a year's rent up front before a landlord will okay their application for an apartment. And the you know, the rationale is always the same, that the new immigrant doesn't have a job, so the landlord can't accept them as though they could a tenant who was applying from within Canada who had lived here. And that's another discriminatory practice. It's contrary to the Residential Tenancies Act, and tenants can take action to recover illegal deposits And if anyone approaching your organization has this problem, please refer them to a community legal clinic to get help.
Obviously, they can. I mean, it's good that we at least have that. These resources that we're, like the Legal Aid Network and your clinic, Joe. And on the other hand, we have, settlement agencies and workers that are dedicated to this cause. But it can be quite frustrating. I mean, I'm putting my shoes in, and say if I was a client who's just, it's just been difficult to find proper housing, and I go back and forth, say, this person was not, I almost had this, and you can go back and forth through, legal clinics and back to settlement, and feeling hopeless, right? What alternatives do we have? I mean, Romina, where do you go from there? Like, do you look for a different, outside the city, perhaps, a different location? Do we have sponsors that can take families in? Where do you go from there?
Well, in many cases, I have advocated on behalf of my clients, calling the landlords and trying to find an arrangement. Like I said, the language barrier is a big one. Right now, in times of pandemic, it's like the anxiety has grown even more. People they feel stuck living in a place that they are being mistreated or harassed by the landlord sometimes, or asking them to leave the place and then putting any excuse in order for people to live. Like I said, we offer also the option of applying for subsidized housing, but unfortunately, those waiting lists are extremely, pardon me, I need to mute this 1 second. Sorry about that. So like I said, try to apply for housing. In the city right now, housing in Toronto, waiting lists are like up to 10 years. That's what they say, but the waiting times keep getting longer and longer. So the option is to apply for other cities surrounding the Greater Toronto area, or even further. Some people have applied for Durham region, York region, but unfortunately, there's not many options. So we offer the information, we offer the resources, but sometimes it's not enough. And then yes, definitely is what you're saying. Like, people feel discouraged, and at some point they feel like we as professionals, we don't want to help them necessarily. And sometimes we are also running out of resources in those terms.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm wondering, how long does it take usually, like say typically, to find proper housing on average? Like, is it a few months?
Sorry, was that the question for me?
Yeah, you or Bisan. I mean, when do you follow through?
Well, it depends. It depends on the number of applications. It depends on the city that you're applying. It depends on the unit size, the requirements of the landlord. It depends on many factors. Unfortunately, it's like a lottery. There's nothing certain. There's not a formula that you can say this is going to work better than this. Like Bisan was saying, like we reach out to landlords, we reach out to case workers from Ontario Works and see if we can find arrangements with clients and landlords. But our job sometimes, like I said, is limited, and the times of like finding proper or in many cases, like that's not the case. Like finding proper and good housing, many times it's not in the area that people is looking for. Many times it's like really far from schools. When you have children, you have to look into that as well. Prices are like over the top. Sometimes the contracts are not clear, and then people end up paying like monthly rent, and then they also pay for utilities that were not included at the beginning. Like there's many factors that make housing subject super difficult one for us. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just wanted to ask our attendees if, just generally, I mean, because, we're open to questions, by the way, but have any of you, and raise your hand, you can just raise your hand if to say yes, answer the question yes. I mean, if you had any issues as a tenant where you felt mistreated in any way or felt you were denied, a contract to a place, but did not seek legal action because you felt it would not help, that you couldn't do anything, that your hands were tied. If so, just raise your hand in the chat room, because it'll be interesting to see how many people actually faced such issues, if you've had any challenges in the past. I see those hands are starting to go up. In the meantime, I know then there's the other part where once you do find housing, right, as a newcomer, you may not be aware of the rules, laws. And we do get, because of the real estate, the inflation, real estate market, we've seen year on year the growth, right, and the high demand, that you have some landlords that feel, well, I can do something with this place, I can turn it around, get more income. So the tenants that are living now, I can't increase the rent because of the limitations. So I'd rather have them out and bring new ones in, something like that. So there comes the issue of eviction. I mean, that's just one of many reasons that I just noted. I'm sure, I know, again, Bisan and Romina, we were talking about this as well, about that you get clients that talk about evictions, that face eviction notices. Tell us a little bit, you had a scenario, Bisan, you had an example of someone who came to you with that. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, actually, yeah, we face, we listen from clients all the time about problems that they face. And yeah, we have a family that went into this eviction problem. The thing is, we try our best to, connect with the landlords for the sake of language barriers, because sometimes it's hard to communicate if the client doesn't have the language. But if we can't find a solution, then we refer them to the legal rights and community legal clinics. And from there, we continue with them if they still need the help, like interpretation services. We continue with them. If they're able to go on their own, then they go from there.
And then, so we've got a couple of questions coming in, but on that note, actually, when it comes to evictions, Joe, what I know, again, you probably get a lot of cases with evictions. How many are actually aware of these, and what do you do when tenants come to you with such cases?
Well, I think the first thing to know, and I would urge your colleagues to appreciate that eviction, and we're assuming we're talking about tenancies that are covered by the law for our purposes here. Eviction's a legal process, so always get legal advice. Refer people to community legal clinics so they can get proper legal advice. Another thing that's important for tenants to know, and especially newcomers who may not be familiar with Canadian laws, Canadian culture, Ontario tenancy law, just because a landlord wants to evict you and gives you a notice or tells you have to leave, you don't have to leave. Eviction is a legal process, and there are certain rights and obligations and responsibilities within the law that both landlords and tenants need to comply with. But an order terminating a tenant's tenancy has to be granted by the landlord-tenant board. So if ever you encounter a tenant who is facing a problem like this and says their landlord is looking to evict them or has served them with a notice, always get legal advice. And for a type of a problem like that, a tenant's facing, a community legal clinic is the place to call.
Alvaro, who's just wrote in the chat room, he says, on that note about landlords, he says, please advise on how to effectively deal with abusive landlords. I don't know what he means by abusive, how abusive, hope not physically abusive. but who can represent the tenants? And he cites some examples like exaggerated rent hikes, eviction without proper cause, and harassment. So Joe, that's to you, I guess.
Yeah, and each one of those things are illegal. So the law that governs residential tenancies in Ontario is called the Residential Tenancies Act, and in it are rules about rent increases and the proper steps a landlord must take to have a rent increase and the timing of that. It'd be important for people to know that the government of Ontario passed a law last week forbidding guideline rent increases during 2021. So keep that in mind. Harassment by a landlord is contrary to the Residential Tenancies Act. In some situations, it may be even contrary to the Criminal Code of Canada. So always obtain legal advice. And again, if a landlord tries to evict a tenant, there are rules that they have to follow, notices that have to be served, explanations that need to be provided for in the notices with oftentimes documentary attachments, confirming or supporting the details in the notice. So always get legal advice. Never assume what the landlord is telling you about an eviction is accurate or legal. Always get legal advice.
Valentine has a question, or several questions actually. She says, why is there no formula for a way out? There should be a formula to resolve such crises. And well, she adds on to that, she says, lots of immigrants are dying in silence and living in fear because of continuous harassment of their landlords. So I guess you answered sort of that question, Joe, like saying that, it's always, if you feel that frustrated, you have that avenue, we have these legal clinics and these services are provided for free, right?
That's correct. To low-income people, absolutely. Yes.
And Romina, I want you to add to that question, to Valentine's, I was going to say, quote unquote, frustration on behalf of others, because you also work in mental health and you are quite experienced in such cases where, this leads to something else. Here you are, you've got this situation and now it's become an emotional, burden as well, not just financial or a settlement issue.
Correct. I would say that most of the anxiety is about the uncertain. So whenever people don't have information, like Joe was mentioning, this eviction is a process. And the landlord needs to notify you. It's not only just one letter and then you're out. It's a process. So you need to serve the person with different notices before you get to that point where you need to have a hearing. Then the board needs to hear about like the reasons why you're being evicted, if it's fair, if it's not. So I think providing that information to the clients already make a difference, because all that uncertainty and all that anxiety that causes not having the information and thinking that they have to leave the place, let's say next week, they don't have a place to go. It's super difficult to rent a new place. Right now, like we say, if a person has been living in the same place for 10 years and they need to vacate that and go to a new place, they will be paying like maybe 50% more of the rent that they are already paying in that specific place. So there are many aspects that can make a person even more nervous and more anxious and not know where to go. But what I'm saying is like just providing the information and providing the resources. We also found out that throughout the pandemic times, the legal aid line, the phone line, if you go to the website, it's like open. There's no waiting times in pandemic times. So you can like dial that number and you will receive information, even in your own language. If you say, I need information in Spanish, somebody will call you back and give you the information. So that's like a quick.
That's good to know. So Joe, get ready now. Everyone knows that your line is free. So get ready for 100 calls today.
We can also provide, if someone calls our clinic and doesn't speak English, we can also provide them with services through an interpreter in their own language. So that, thank you, Romina. That's a very good point for people to understand.
Yeah, that came from Valentine. I think she wanted to add a few things. So I've given you the option to unmute Valentine if that was good. But in the meantime, Romina, we have in the chat room a question in Spanish from Ludmila.
Yes.
You saw that. If you want to read it and maybe.
So there were two questions. I think like if I go a little higher, Ludmila asked something else. Oh, yes. She says, ¿cuál es el porcentaje de rechazados? ¿Cómo obtener una renta cuando apenas se está llegando al país y no se tiene credit score? So she's asking, what is the percentage of rejected applications and how to obtain rent when you're just coming to the country and you don't have a credit score? That's the first question. And then she asked, it shouldn't excess the same price in apartments of the same conditions in the same building. So apparently what she's referring to is like there are different prices for the same apartment in the same building. Actualmente por el déficit de inquilinos en mi edificio se manejan diferentes precios. Okay, so she's mentioning that in the building that she lives right now, there are different prices because there's not high demand of people looking for places.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could comment on that. In Ontario, there is no rent control when an apartment is vacant. The rent control laws only take effect when an apartment becomes occupied. So if you have lived in your apartment for 10 years, you moved in 2010 and you're still there, you're living in a high rise and it's a 2-bedroom apartment, your rent in Toronto might be $1,400, say, for example. But in another 2-bedroom apartment that just became vacant in the same building, the same layout as the apartment you're living in, once that apartment becomes empty, the landlord can charge any rent that the market can bear. So a 2-bedroom rented out now that becomes vacant may be more expensive to rent than someone who's been living in the similar apartment in the same building for 10 years or less. So that's why you have these disparities between the rent charged for the same types of apartments within the same buildings.
Para que quede más clara la información a la pregunta de Ludmila en español, en Ontario no hay control de renta para las unidades que están vacantes. Solamente el control de renta se aplica a las unidades que ya están siendo ocupadas. Entonces, si una persona vive en una unidad por tantos años, entonces bajo la ley no están los landlords, no tienen la libertad de poner ningún precio aparte del que ya se está haciendo, del que ya están cobrando, ¿no? Por esa unidad. Excepto cuando la unidad se queda libre, ahí ya el landlord puede cobrar el precio del mercado y lo que aguanta el mercado, o sea, de acuerdo al precio de renta de otras unidades, ya sea en el mismo edificio o en edificios aledaños. Entonces no hay control de renta acerca de unidades que están libres.
Just want to also note that anyone can also, connect with us after the session or with any of our settlement workers.
Okay, my question is to Joe.
Yes, so we have Florenda on the line who wants to ask a question. Florenda, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, my question is to Joe. I want to ask you, Joe, because I've been evicted from landlord that I live here from 14 years, and then, well, my husband came in to live with me, and the rent went high, right? So, and then, but after like a couple years, my husband left me, and then, so the landlord, now I own like $11,000 to them. but my husband went to bankruptcy, and then he told me that he put the rent on the bankruptcy, right? So, and then he spoke to Paula, that's the social worker that from housing, and then so they deal. I don't know what they deal, but my husband told, you don't have to call Florinda anymore because I'm fixing this. But it's still, they sending me letter that I had to go to court, that I'm gonna be eviction, and then so I don't know what to do because, well, I'm not working, I'm on disability right now. But why they still doing this to me? And that's make me stressed. I feel more stressed because I don't know what to do. I'm confused about this. So please, Joe, if you can help me on this and tell me what to do.
Are you still living in the same place where you owe the money to, or is it a former landlord?
Yeah.
I'm still living at the same place.
Okay. So is it subsidized housing?
Yes.
Okay, because I thought, because you mentioned when someone moved in, the rent went up. So it sounds like
that was my husband that he moves. No, well, I told him because I have so much, I'm so confused right now, but you know, my kids let me by myself because they don't want to they will start working and they hide the rent too, right? And then my kids, I have my younger one that 16 years old. But, and then my son said, no, I won't pay that much in this place because I have like replace problem too, that they don't want to do it. And so my son said, no, I'm leaving. I don't want to pay any rent here because this is garbage where we live in. They don't want to fix, they don't want to do anything. And so my husband too, he left, but he left me for the same reason. I believe, I don't know why, right?
I think
so,
what I would recommend, Florinda, is to call me after the session is over. And if you're in the area of our legal clinic, I'm happy to meet with you and go over all the documents you have. If you live in the area of another legal clinic, let me refer you to the clinic in your area so you can get legal help. It sounds like a complicated matter involving a subsidized housing provider, so it would be helpful to be able to see some of the documents. So you can call me. I don't know if Miles, if my number is available there, but I can give you the number, Florinda, if it's not in any of the materials, and I'm happy to speak with you after the session.
If Joe, you want to share, your email or your to the group, you can type it in the chat room.
I'm going to do that now.
You can send it directly to Linda.
Okay, I really want to speak to you, Joe. I really want to speak with you, Joe, because I speak to one of the lawyers, they call Kill and Finch Community Legal Service. But this guy told me that I had to go through my husband. So I don't want to deal with my husband. You know, it's so stressful for me. And then I don't want to deal with him. So why they don't deal with him? I told Paula, and then Paula was talking to him. And then, so it was stopped. And at the end, they come back again and doing this to me. So I don't want to speak to that guy anymore, to Kill and Finch.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you, but I don't want to get too much into your case because I know from, legal perspective, we don't want something because it's a public domain. Maybe there's too much personal information. And then when you speak to Joe, then you get more into details just so to protect your rights as well, because anyone listening here could, use any information against you. I don't know if Joe is that. It's always better to keep it one.
I put my contact information in the chat. So if you want to call later at that number or email me at that address, I'm happy to speak to you then.
Thank you so much, Florinda. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe, for that. We have a lot of questions, so I want to get into that, and a lot of them are legal type of questions. So Charles is asking Joe, is the housing tribunal sitting or closed during COVID?
That's a good question. It's technically open, but all hearings are being conducted remotely, either by telephone or through Zoom like this, or whatever the Landlord Tenant Board's Zoom is. I think it's Google Works or something. So it is open. They are holding some hearings. Having said that, the board is only functioning at about 15-20% capacity. So there is a huge backlog of cases. And how long it will take the board to work through that backlog is anybody's guess. It could be months, several months. But to answer the question, technically the board is open, but only for telephone and remote hearings.
We have a question from Maria. She says, when a landlord kicks you out or gives you a notice to move out of the house and you can't find a place, how can you buy time? I mean, can he force you to leave, especially now under the COVID circumstances that we're living in?
That's another really good question. So when COVID hit in the middle of March, the Ontario government passed an emergency order that basically stopped or froze all evictions. So from the middle of March to the end of July, even if there was an eviction order, if it hadn't been enforced before March 15th, then there were no evictions. But the Ontario government at the end of July said, beginning August 1st, we're going to allow evictions to take place again. So technically now it is possible for an eviction order from the Landlord and Tenant Board to be enforced by the sheriff. And the process for that is that the sheriff sends a tenant or the occupants of a rental unit what is called a notice to vacate in the mail, informing those residents that the eviction order will be enforced as of a certain date. Legal clinics in Toronto have commenced legal action against the Ontario government, saying that it's not fair to enforce eviction orders during a pandemic. And that case is still before the Ontario Superior Court, but it's important to note that even though the case is before the Superior Court, evictions are still permitted by Ontario law and they're still being enforced. So that's an unfortunate circumstance right now that the government of Ontario is allowing evictions.
You know, actually, on that note, our settlement workers have had clients who were refused entry into their apartment. There was one particular case about someone returning from China. Bisan, I know you know about this case as well, but that person was asked to stay outside of her apartment for 14 days. Bisan, tell us a little about that. I want to ask you, and I think you kind of answered the question whether this is legally correct or not, but Bisan, tell us more about that, please.
Yeah, I know after travel right now, the quarantine is recommended for 14 days. I know that case that the client wanted to go back into her apartment, and she was stopped from doing that because she was coming specifically from China, where it's known, you know, to public and to everyone that the virus originally came from China. So she was stopped from. She was asked to stay outside her apartment for 14 days. I believe if she wasn't like affecting anyone with she wasn't in contact with someone who has the virus, or she doesn't have the virus, or she shouldn't be stopped from staying into her apartment legally. She shouldn't be stopped. If she lives with someone else, probably that's a different situation, but she shouldn't be stopped from staying outside her apartment. That's my own opinion. I don't know what Joe thinks about that, but if it's her own apartment, she's renting the apartment, she's paying the rent, she's coming into her house, she's not supposed to be stopped.
There is a question actually that came from Stephanie, and I'm through the Q&A chat that's kind of related because Joe, she's saying, what's the best way for newcomers to learn about their rights as tenants? Because this kind of applies here. And is there like a website? Are there resources that are translated?
That's a good question. First of all, I agree with you, Bisan. I think you're exactly right about that situation and the tenant being allowed into her own apartment. You're absolutely correct. In terms of legal, finding out about your legal rights when you're a new immigrant to Canada, to Ontario, and you're renting an apartment, it's interesting. In 2017, the Ontario government passed a law in which they introduced a standard lease to Ontario tenants, requiring landlords, if they were going to provide a tenancy agreement, it had to be on this standard form. And one of the other functions of law in Ontario is that landlords are obligated to provide tenants with information about their basic rights and about the landlord and tenant board. And those types of documents are to be attached to lease agreements in Ontario. It tells tenants where they can find out information about their rights and how they go about doing that. So to answer the question, it should be attached to the lease. Those documents essentially refer tenants to the landlord and tenant board. Another way to find out, again, not to sound like a broken record, contact your local legal clinic, reach out to other people in your community like settlement workers and other organizations that support and work with new immigrants, and they can connect you to these various resources.
Thank you so much. There is an organization called CLEO, C-L-E-O. They have a dedicated website that actually has information and has different languages. I will type in that in the chat in a second. Thank you for that. A question actually and the answer. We have a question here from actually Adriana. I want to give her the floor. She's been waiting for a while to talk. Adriana, go ahead. Adriana Martinez. If you can
Sí, Adriana, si
Yes,
estás
yes.
presente. Sí,
Ahora
podrías
sí,
preguntar,
ya.
hacer la pregunta en español y si necesitas la puedo traducir o directamente preguntar en
Sí,
inglés.
pues
¿Cómo se
la hago en
sienta?
español mejor.
Ok, bueno.
Quería saber cada cuánto es normal que se suba la renta
Ujú,
y especialmente ahorita que estábamos pasando este momento del COVID, que no se trabaja todo el tiempo, tú sabes, hay días que sí, hay días que no, que hay
correcto.
personas que sí hemos recibido la asistencia, otras que tampoco la hemos podido recibir, porque
Ujú.
igual seguimos trabajando en corto tiempo. Quería saber si porque le suben, por lo menos en mi caso me subieron, le digo yo, ¿en serio subieron la renta en el edificio donde vivo?
Ajá.
O sea, no he dejado de pagar, la verdad, pero pues quería saber eso, en realidad.
Ok,
Llevo
ok.
4 años viviendo en el edificio, entonces, bueno, estamos pasando por una situación un poco difícil. Esa era solamente mi pregunta.
Ujú. Bueno, gracias Adriana. Ahora
Gracias.
le
Bueno,
traduzco al...
ok, bueno, muy formal.
So Adriana is asking how often is the rent, can be the rent increase in a year? Because right now in times of pandemic, she's saying that she's working less. Sometimes people is not receiving the benefits from the government. They are finding it really hard to pay for rent. And on top of that, like the landlord has increased her rent in this month. So she's asking how legal is this move from the landlord?
The basic rules around rent increases is that the rent can be increased once every 12 months. So if I moved into an apartment on March 1st, 2020, the first rent increase I could incur would be March 2021. So once every 12 months. Just very quickly, there are two different types of rent increases, legal rent increases in Ontario. One is called a guideline rent increase. The guideline for 2020 is 2.2%. The guideline for 2021, as I mentioned earlier, is 0%. There's no guideline increase for 2021. The other type of rent increase is an above guideline rent increase. That's sort of a special rent increase. It's allowed in situations where a landlord has spent money to make capital improvements in the building, for example. That type of rent increase requires permission and approval from the landlord and tenant board before the rent increase can take effect legally. The other thing to just bear in mind, no rent increase can be legal without a tenant receiving a notice of rent increase form from their landlord 90 days prior to a rent increase. So once every 12 months, it's got to be on the notice of rent increase form, and it has to be at least 90 days notice.
Adriana, ¿pudo entender la respuesta o necesita traducción?
Oh, she's muted, but I mean, if you want to briefly maybe, and then we can always connect with her one-on-one as well afterwards.
No, she understood. She says she understood. Yeah.
Perfect. So we've got a lot of questions coming in, and we've got 10 minutes. So I'm going to try to run this through really quickly. This is to you, actually, Romina. If your co-tenant appears to have mental health problems, outbursts, paranoia, forgetfulness, what can be done?
Yeah, again goes into the legal terms, because it's like, I think I understood the question as if the person has mental health problems, if can this person be evicted from the house or complaints? I didn't understand well.
If the tenant has the mental health problems, like frustration, I know we can help in that as
if a co-tenant. So it's like, I guess like this person is renting a room and has somebody else renting another room who is unstable mentally. That's what I understand from the question.
Yeah.
And if the co-tenant can do something or the landlord can do something to evict someone with mental health, I guess it goes, there's like many limits to that question. If the person is like unstable mentally and is a danger to others in the house, that's one thing. But if the person is has outbursts, paranoia, which is not endangering people in the house, I don't know if Joe can help with that.
Well, just to say quickly, landlords are permitted to serve eviction notices to tenants whose behavior may disturb other tenants or may interfere with landlord's rights and legal privileges. However, having said that, every eviction under the Residential Tenancies Act is subject to and must comply with the Human Rights Code of Ontario. And discriminating against a tenant by introducing eviction proceedings can in itself be contrary to the Human Rights Code, and an eviction should not be granted, assuming a landlord knows of a person's disabling medical condition. So in Ontario, people with disabilities are to be accommodated to the point of undue hardship, and that's a legal term that is not clearly defined in the law, and takes into account a lot of factors. But the point being, people with disabilities, including with people with mental health disabilities and tenants with mental health disabilities, have the protection of the Human Rights Code of Ontario. So again, any tenant facing eviction for a ground of disturbing behavior or antisocial activities, etc., who receives a legal order should always obtain legal advice to know their rights, including their rights under the Ontario Human Rights Code. That
question came from Niconius. Thank you, Niconius, for that. I know as well, because this question is someone talking about a co-tenant. So we also have to be mindful that, whoever is, you don't want to assume that the other person has mental health problems, right? Unless they are aware of the fact and they're getting help. So it's kind of a unique situation. So we always have to be mindful. We have a question about, actually kind of related, about a single mom who went through domestic violence and is struggling to pay rent. Could she obtain any sort of help?
she can definitely make an appointment with one of our settlement workers, because there are applications that are emergency, for emergency situations like this one, and we can explain further to this person if they really need help in this sense.
Here's a question about refugees who face challenges. They say usually the affordable areas are high crime or socially deteriorated areas, the affordable areas for renting, of course. Do you have any knowledge of what are the most affordable but still are safe areas of Toronto? I think that's kind of a question that needs a little bit of research and would be a little bit sensitive. But we could connect with Alvaro, who's asked that question. Maybe if you can connect with us, I would say, with one of our team after the show, and we can assist you in your needs, because it's kind of a poor personal situation, I guess. Unless you have something to say, Bisan or Romina, on that.
Yes, actually, we always recommend the subsidized housing, but we come back to the same problem. That's the long waiting list for those houses. We recommend areas like far from the city, like far from Toronto specifically. Other than that, it's really hard. It's really hard to help.
Thank you. We have another question coming from Novlet. She says, what can I do if my landlord lives in the same building, harassed me, blocking me from kitchen, kicking the room door, so quite abusive, and putting things in the way that I can trip over, hurling expletives, and he goes on. I can't cook, he takes the burners off the stove, I pay my rent, but lately I hardly sleep there. So I guess that goes, that's your department too.
That's tricky because in that question, it's impossible to determine based on the question if the tenancy is a tenancy covered by the Residential Tenancies Act or not. Some tenancies are outside of the Residential Tenancies Act. So a tenancy where the landlord and the tenant are living under the same roof, and where the tenant and the owner are sharing a kitchen or a bathroom, those types of tenancies are not covered. A tenancy where you're renting a 2-bedroom apartment and you look to rent out one of the bedrooms, so I rent out one of the bedrooms from you, my tenancy is not covered under the law because I'm living with the other tenant and paying my rent to the tenant. So if you're not covered by the Residential Tenancies Act, it's a whole different answer. But if your tenancy is one where you are covered by the Residential Tenancies Act, and a landlord is illegally entering your unit and engaging in this harassing behavior, then there are steps for a tenant can take. If something like that, the first step is call the police. And the second step is to contact a legal clinic and find out about making an application to the Landlord and Tenant Board about this harassing behavior, and making an application to the board for various remedies, including an abatement of rent, fine against the landlord, getting the landlord to stop the behavior, etc. There are other legal steps you can take, like calling the Landlord and Tenant Board investigation unit to get involved in that type of situation. But the whole answer is prefaced on whether or not the tenancy is covered by the Residential Tenancies Act or not.
You know, that's the other thing, is that you do see or hear about newcomers who come here and they get taken advantage of, that where they don't sign a proper tenancy contract, because it's either a cash sort of relationship, a transaction where it's like, okay, you can rent my basement apartment, there goes, you're evading taxes, of course. We hear a lot about that, but then here's a relationship that is not documented, so anything could go wrong. And I'm sure there are cases that we've all heard of, but I think this is a good opportunity to stress how important it is to do stuff legally and follow a legal, route from day one when you arrive here, even though, and it won't cost you more. People think it's going to cost them more, but is there anything you can say about that? Like, is that a situation that you've had to deal with where there are no contracts and they couldn't do anything because?
All the time. And it's important for people to know just because you have, you're in a tenancy, you don't have to have a written tenancy agreement. In Ontario, tenancy agreements can be in writing or they can be verbal between people. It's always better if it's in writing, in my opinion, and if you can get it in writing, and you should get it in writing, but legally there's no absolute requirement that it must be in writing.
Yes, we actually reached almost the end of the show, but there's a few more questions. I don't know if you don't mind staying, I know you're quite busy, Joe, but do you think we still have, like, can we put a few extra minutes?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to stay for a few minutes, for sure.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. It's a hot topic for sure. And the next question is actually interesting because I hear we hardly think about this unless you face it. It says, do you have to buy insurance for the rented apartment by law? The client is renting an apartment, but not sure that if they have to buy insurance too.
That's an excellent question. And in many written leases, there is a clause requiring a tenant to purchase insurance. In nearly all standard leases now in 2020, this will be a term. However, if it's not a term in your lease or you don't have a lease, it's always a good idea for tenants to have insurance. Absolutely. And I urge my clients who don't have insurance to purchase insurance if at all possible. I know it's an added expense, and a lot of our clients don't have the money to do it or find it very difficult to purchase insurance, but it's always a good idea. Absolutely.
Carolina asks about, and this is quite interesting, about fixing things in that apartment that you're renting. It says, what are my landlord's responsibilities when it comes to fixing things in the house? I've been living here for a year and a half and he has never cleaned the vents. Am I supposed to clean them myself or is he supposed to do it?
For genuine repairs, that's always the landlord's responsibility, always. So even if a tenant breaks something, it's not the tenant's obligation to fix it. So let's say that you are in an apartment and you have a young child and the young child puts a plastic toy in the toilet and it causes the toilet to back up and a plumber has to be called to fix it. It's always the landlord's responsibility to engage the plumber and make the repair happen and coordinate it. The tenant may have to pay for it if their behavior has been negligent and it's led to undue damage being caused. But it's always the landlord's responsibility to make the repair. For things that are not so obvious, such as, changing burnt out light bulbs or cleaning vents, I think tenants can engage in that and do that themselves unless there's some reason, disability related or something like that, that they can't do it. I wouldn't take things apart. I wouldn't, take apart a vent to have it cleaned because you may encounter some difficulty putting it back together. In that case, the landlord should do it. But otherwise, general cleaning and upkeep is cleanliness is the tenant's responsibility. Repairs are always the landlord's responsibility.
Yes, cleanliness is next to godliness, as they say. So we have a question here. I think it's coming from one of our partner organizations. Stephanie says, I'm finding a lot of newcomers on Ontario Works are not being approved unless they have a co-signer, a guarantor. Many newcomers don't know who will take on this responsibility for them. Are there any options here?
I mean, maybe Bisan and Romina are in a better position to answer. I'll just say that a landlord requiring a guarantor at the outset of a tenancy, it's legal in Ontario. There's nothing illegal about that. For newcomers, having a guarantor, it doesn't have to be an individual. I've had many cases where churches or other sponsoring organizations, community groups have acted as guarantors for tenants signing leases.
There's a question here about, I don't know, Romina, you want to add something to that? Or Bisan?
Maybe if Joe can explain the legal extent of a warrantor, what is the warrantor responsible of? Because in that sense, like our organization could provide for that?
It's a really good question, Romina. And unfortunately, as many things in the law, there's not an absolutely clear answer. So when tenants sign a lease and you have a guarantor in the lease, generally speaking, the lease is for 1 year. And at the end of that year, a tenant is not required to sign a new lease, but in law, the terms of their tenancy agreement roll over on a monthly basis. So the legal question is often, when you have a guarantor, is that guarantor just for the first 12 months of the lease, or does that guarantor continue after the 12 months and the tenancy becomes a monthly tenancy? My view is the obligations of the guarantor end at 12 months and don't roll over indefinitely. But the courts are not totally clear on that.
Yeah.
There's a question here about can anything be done to prevent the no rent control in Ontario?
Yes. Contact your MPP, lobby your politicians or the provincial government and get them to change the law. Yes, this is what tenants can do more than anything else. Speak to your members of provincial parliament, lobby them, change the law.
And you feel that a lot needs to be done in that aspect, right?
Yeah, I mean, the backdrop of everything we're talking about today, not everything, but a lot of it, is there's an affordability crisis in housing throughout Ontario, but it is acute in Toronto, and it is a real problem. And so many of the issues that face Ontario's tenants arise from a problem of affordability and a lack of affordable housing. So the changing that is largely engaging in a political dynamic, and that's going to be the most effective change.
That's the thing. I mean, any mushrooming city we saw the real estate boom and a little bit of a correction, but it's still booming. It's still like thanks to the real estate moguls and even the agents. There's so many agents around that promote this hype as well, right? Everyone is after a fast buck, but there are people are here on the chat room today they're suffering at the end of the day, right? I mean, there are repercussions. So there's always three sides to every story, but the idea is to try to make it a good story at the end of the day, a happy story. Irma has a question, but I think it's more of a personal question. So I'm going to refer her to you, Joe, after Irma. Thank you for that, because it's quite, I think it's quite detailed and personal. Maybe you can help her. It's about being evicted and credit. That's another thing, actually, I want to ask you about bad credit, because or no credit history. People show up, they have no credit history, so they can't sign a contract. What do we do in that situation? How can we help? This is to Romina or Bisan. Bisan, go ahead. You're muted.
Yeah, I believe it's going to be in the same situation as lacking financial need. It's going to be actually they need a cosigner for having the rent settled, and it's happened to many clients I have actually. For those newcomers who don't have who receive an Ontario Works and they don't have the credit score available. They did need someone to guarantor or a cosigner for them to be able to get their rent settled.
Yes, thanks. Just a couple of more questions and we'll wrap the seminar. But we have a question from Omar. He says, "What can a tenant do about a noisy landlord? He's dragging, dropping, stomping in an old house. The tenant lives in the basement, so I guess the landlord lives in the main house." We see that kind of issue all the time, right?
Yes, yeah. And so the first thing to do is to document it, keep a log, write down when it's happening, for how long it's happening. The first step in trying to solve a problem like this before taking legal action is to speak to and or write the person who you think is causing the problem, tell them that this is what you're experiencing, this is what you're hearing, ask, some way to work it out. Sometimes with noise cases, there are ways to work it out, laying down carpet in the unit above. If it's noise from, say someone practicing a musical instrument or something like that, working out a schedule. So reasonable people can work out problems like this most of the time. If you try that and you still can't work it out, then you have a legal problem, and the answer to a legal problem is an application to the Landlord and Tenant Board to try to get the law to address the problem, seek a reduction in the rent, and other remedies against the landlord.
So I'm going to switch the tables on for our last question. Turn the tables around. So this is a landlord or someone who's sharing a room. So he says, I have a roommate that hasn't paid rent in 4 months, and we're both in the lease, but I have been paying everything on time. I want to know what are my options, because I don't want this to damage my credit. So it's a co-renter. And we see that a lot too. Wow.
So it sounds like it's a straight arrears of rent problem, but there are 2 tenants identified as tenants on a lease. It's likely, although I can't say absolutely, but it's likely that they are considered joint tenants, meaning both of them are responsible for the entire rent, and it doesn't matter that one's not paying his or her portion. So in a situation like that, the landlord could commence eviction proceedings first by serving a notice of termination for non-payment of rent, identifying both tenants on the notice. And then if the rent isn't paid within the void period in the notice, the landlord could file an application at the Landlord Tenant Board to terminate the tenancy based on non-payment of rent, again, against both tenants.
I see. So I get something like this where it's co-signers. Do they still have a place in your, could you advise one of them? Like, can they still come and use legal aid services? Or
yeah, we could advise, and you put it aptly, Miles, we could advise one of them because, one, they sort of have a competing interest against each other. The one who's paying the rent and the other one who's not paying the rent, they might ask, well, what action can they take against each other to try to recover money? So yeah, we would happy to deal with the first one who called us. If the second one called after the first one, we're in a conflict of interest there, and we would refer the second one out to a neighboring legal clinic for help.
And then you have the landlord who might call.
Well, we don't help landlords, so we don't have to worry about that.
Exactly. So I'm going to the last question because we have to wrap this up. It's from Valentine. She says, how effective is the court in handling tenant and landlord cases? Because the landlord told his tenant whom he has been harassing, even if you take it to the court, he said he said to her, we, the landlord, own the court. Sounds like a threat there, but.
I see that question in the chat, and even I would have to concede that the landlords don't own the Landlord-Tenant Board. Sometimes I wonder, but they don't own the Landlord-Tenant Board. So the law is, in seriousness, the law is there to serve both parties. And if a landlord is harassing a tenant, there are steps that the tenant can take. Again, an application to the Landlord and Tenant Board for various remedies available under the Residential Tenancies Act, getting the Landlord and Tenant Board's enforcement and investigation units involved if that's necessary, and thirdly, potentially contacting the police and getting the police involved, because harassment can be an offense under the Criminal Code of Canada as well.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we've come to the end of our show. We've actually exceeded our time, but I want to thank everyone who joined us today for your questions and for participating. I know this is quite a popular topic, but I do thank everyone. Joe, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you I know you're very busy, and we thank you and your organization, Willowdale, for you know, for joining us today and being a panelist. These definitely, I think you've helped a lot of people today. At least we know there's that avenue. Romina and Bisan, we know you're doing great work. Thank you so much again for taking part of our show. I know both of you have clients to see and they're waiting. So thanks so much. For everyone else, I know there's some questions. Irma, please connect with us. I'm going to leave our details here in the chat room. If you scroll up in the chat room, you'll see our contact numbers and Joe's as well. So feel free to contact us by email or call us. We have an iSent support app. So feel free to download that. That's free of charge for our clients. You can communicate with us in English, Spanish, Chinese, Mandarin, or Arabic, and other languages as well we can support. But thank you once more, everyone. So final word, Joe, to you.
Oh, it was a real pleasure to be with everyone today. Miles, thank you so much, and thank your team. It was great to be with you, and thanks for the great work that you're doing. And again, please make sure you refer your clients to legal clinics. They can help people, and I know your organization sees a lot of people in need, and we can be a resource to them. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, always. Bisan, thank you again. Romina, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Everyone,
Bye-bye.
have a good day.